Welcome to Safari Yangu Podcast, where we share our stories unapologetically, experiences that shaped us, and experiences that continue to shape us. I'm your host, Miss Kimaru. Thank you so much for your continued support. I see you on our socials and even on YouTube. Thank you so much. And on today's episode, we reflect on a recent case from Kilifi County where a court blocked an attempt to approve the marriage of a 16-year-old girl to a 22-year-old man. That is, we are still on this streak of child protection and what that means for our communities. So this story raises tough but important questions about child protection, justice, and what happens when a girl's right to education and childhood is traded for marriage. Together, we'll explore why early marriage remains a challenge, its impact on communities, and what we can all do to protect every girl's right to grow, learn, and dream. So, thank you so much and welcome back. Yes, I saw this particular story on social media a while back and I was like, I really need to talk about this. I know I have been a little bit late to the party lately, but I'm honestly trying to catch up. And as I said, with some of these issues, it keeps happening in our communities and in our families. And, we can't just turn a blind eye. We need to keep the conversation going. In my other episode, we talked about the Mahio BC documentary and what that meant for girls who are being traded off to men on highways and how they are locked out of opportunities and collectively what it means child protection, what that means for all of us and what we all need to actually do. I'll start with an experience I've had myself. In 2017, I had the privilege of working in a very remote area in West Pokot. I came into contact with young girls who had been rescued from early marriages and, female genital mutilation. And I came into contact with girls who had gotten babies. Some of them was as old as 21 or 20, and they had gotten their kids. They would be like, oh, I have 4 kids. You're like, oh, you're 20. How are you? How do you end up having 4 kids at 20? They're like, oh, I got my first child at 14 years old. Or I got my first child at 13. I got my first child at 16. So this particular program I was working with, their mandate was rescuing girls from early marriages and FGM. And also, I remember we worked closely with World Vision for this to happen. And that got me thinking how privileged I was to have not experienced that type of, culture. And we will talk about the culture in this episode and what it meant for me to have gotten the opportunity to an education, uninterrupted education, to have gone through high school, university, and to be at a place where I could gain meaningful employment and even work with such type of a community and help other girls realize their dreams. The reason why I really wanted to talk about this 16-year-old girl is because how complex this case was. And as I was saying, in West Pokot, I was able to hear first-hand experiences of what it meant for these girls to go through such experiences and get out of it and be able maybe to get an education, be able to even gain meaningful employment eventually. And I could see the difference that this actually made. So I wanted us to look, I was reading Nation on this particular, when I was doing my research about this particular case, I came across the Nation newspaper, and maybe just to give you a few facts about the case. So this girl, let's call her X, she's 16 years old and she was married to a 22-year-old man. This 16-year-old girl was actually in grade 8. So a Kilifi court has blocked the DPP's bid to approve a child marriage, ordering the arrest of the 22-year-old man, who we are going to call Y. In Ganze, they have ruled against the diversion of defilement charges. So this person had been charged with defilement, calling child marriage abuse and demanding the minor's best interest be safeguarded. The brother had reported his sister missing on August 8th. The girl is a grade 8 student from Ganze sub-county, and she had been living with this 22-year-old man. and she was already pregnant by the time this was happening. So the director of public prosecution, that is the DPP, they decided to not prosecute since they were living as husband and wife, and they described this as a Romeo and Juliet case involving a teenage consensual sexual intercourse. That's what the DPP said. But clearly, we can all see this is not necessarily teenage consensual sexual intercourse, because one is an underage person, and the man who we are calling Y is a 22-year-old man who is, a fully grown adult. Yes, somebody was defending the actions of the DPP. They said they wanted these people together, that is the X and Y. They did not want the child who will be born to miss out on parental love in the event of prosecution. That's the excuse that this person, because Y had been let go, so that they can continue living with X. So they said they did not want the child now who would be born to miss out on parental love in the event of Y being prosecuted for marrying and even impregnating an underage girl. Yes, those are some of the facts from this particular case. How somebody ends up calling it like a Romeo and Juliet case and seeing it as consensual is definitely beyond me. And I was reading this case, there was a whole idea of the minimum age, consensual sex, and stuff like that. And the minimum age of marriage in Kenya is 18, and the Child Act defines anyone under 18 as a child and explicitly prohibits child marriage. Yes, so as I was saying, while I was working in West Pokot, I came across so many of these types of cases. What role do we play as a society? And I know some of you might come here and we could talk about culture, we could talk about expectations and stuff like that. Because if you go to a place like West Pokot, for example, the culture there had been girls will be married off very early on but now we have a constitution that we are working with, and people keep doing that, and it is very illegal. And from a point of view of having worked with these girls, from what I saw was that marrying them off early meant they missed out on an education. It also meant that they were not empowered to even be able to work or earn a living for themselves. It also meant they will be ignorant to so many things because they don't have an education, whether it came to the issue of even raising a family or making sure that their kids access an education. I mean, but they keep saying that if you educate a woman, you educate a whole community. So when girls are married off at such an early age, it means they don't access education, they don't access opportunities, and they end up even giving birth. They're ignorant to the fact of things like contraceptives and stuff like that. So you go to such communities, you find that there's like the ratio. I remember at that time, the ratio, I think, of one woman to children was, I think, either 7 or 9, if I'm not wrong. That was back in 2017. West Pokot had like the highest ratio of kids to one woman. And if you look at what was happening, it's the cycle of poverty kept, nothing changes at all. The cycle of poverty, kids not being able to attain an education, it continues, and nothing changes for people in these communities. So while I was looking at this case, I thought about the societal expectations. I thought about cultural norms like that. I thought about poverty. Like, I was talking to someone I know about this particular case, and they talked about that maybe sometimes why some of these girls get married off early is also because of poverty. Like, you're poor in your family probably can't also even be able to take you to school or do these things for you. So the next thing you know, you just end up in the same cycle of poverty. You get married early, you start giving birth early, you do all these things early, and then, like if you look at Kilifi is one of those places in Kenya where poverty is like I think there's a lot of poverty in Kilifi, and for somebody they might actually see it as a reason why maybe girls would fall into such a trap of getting married early. But at the end of the day, this case was kind of very unique. So you wonder what legal protections currently exist in Kenya to prevent child marriage, and why was this Kilifi court decision so significant? I feel like as I was looking at this case, and the fact that there was somebody arguing that the baby will miss out on parental care if the man is prosecuted, I saw it from a point of view of, but what about the girl? What about the fact that she was a child? And this person, because according to the laws of Kenya, which we looked at in the previous episode, if you are below 18, you're a child. And anyone who engages in sex with you, it means they should know better because they are the adult. So in this case, how do we safeguard children if even like a whole DPP could make a conclusion like that and decide that can you protect this girl is already pregnant? How can we protect the girl plus the baby she's about to give birth to, while also holding this man accountable and not letting him go? Because if you let him go, it continues propagating the narrative that we have a constitution that says this, but we can also do whatever else we want on the side. So and also in the last episode I also wondered, what role does like the child protective services or children officers play in protecting minors from such unions happening? Are people reporting, or in a place like Kilifi people have just allowed it to happen and it has been normalized? How can you help communities like these come into like get to a place where they feel it's a communal responsibility, that we need to safeguard girls, we need to give them opportunities, we need to show them that this is how they should do things, and we need not to take advantage of them? And what type of pressure does it mean that coming also from a poor background, there is like the pressure to now live a certain way of life? What can the government do to get people to a place where you're not surviving on a bare minimum? Marriage does not sound like an option for you as a young girl just because maybe you cannot afford a meal in your home. You see, because as I said, poverty could be one of the reasons. Like it keeps propagating the idea of I'm looking for safety, and maybe that safety comes from that man out there walking around and they seem a little bit well off, like from what we have in our home. And how can local leaders be involved? Communities, how can parents be involved? How can communities be involved? Because as I was reading this case, I read a place that this person, I think the judge who ruled, they were worried that people now will not be reporting these types of cases because they feel like because even the family of the girl, actually, let me see, the family of the girl, actually, they are worried for the girl, and I think for them they would have wanted for this marriage to actually continue. This little girl they were taken to a rescue center for 2 weeks under a care and protection order, summoning the prosecution office in Kilifi to explain circumstances under which the case was deferred, ensuring the perpetrator is brought before court without further delay, directing the Vitengeni officer commanding station to rearrest the perpetrator, and facilitating resubmission of the file to the DPP for appropriate charges under the Sexual Offences Act and the Children Act 2022. So they said that the lady, now ex, will receive psychological support and counseling for the minor through the government child protection officer and a certified child counselor due to the trauma she had already endured. But also Ms. Wasike acknowledges complex family challenges ahead. The victim's family has strongly expressed dissatisfaction with how the case has been handled and must be supported to accept the child back and provide emotional, psychosocial and holistic support she requires, given that the court cannot allow her to return to her marriage. So the court has definitely refused. She can go back to this marriage. And also the court also ordered that the minor be allowed to sit for her examination, and the reintegration process must be conducted carefully. So yeah, so this girl had been reported missing, and then she's found staying with a man. My point goes back. To how do you safeguard children when maybe the people in authority, for example, like this DPP, would not see that case as a case that really needed urgent care, and in the context of the girl, they are only seeing it in the context of the unborn child, like, oh, this child would miss out on a fatherly love. And what does denying girls an education and these opportunities, what is the final outlook? Like maybe for girls in Kilifi, for example, 5 years down the line, how does their life look like? Because I can tell you for sure, when I was in West Pokot, you could see these kids, the girls I was working with, they had missed out on an opportunity on education very early on. Some of them sat for their exams way later in life, like for example, high school education, like maybe when they were maybe in their 20s, they missed out on those opportunities because they got kids very early on in their lives. And were it not for the programs we were running there, they probably would have continued with the same cycle of poverty, being ignorant, not being educated. They keep missing out on that. So, and if you look, as I said, if you empower a woman and they go to school, they are well educated and stuff like that, it means you are also lowering the levels of poverty, because these people are empowered. They'll take their kids to school. And in an episode in an episode on the Sparkit podcast, I spoke to some lady from South Sudan, and this girl, she was giving me the state of education, especially for young girls in South Sudan. And you could see how girls have not been prioritized in their country and how they fall in the same cycle of poverty, because the girls there, some of them are seen as dowry, they are seen as a means to an end. They can even be taken out of a class to get married off and stuff like that. And when you do that, it means these women cannot own property. They don't know how they cannot advance themselves. They cannot earn an income. They cannot get a job. And automatically, at some point, the cycle of poverty continues. They not educate their children. They will not seize opportunities. It's just there. And for young girls, when such a case plays out, and if it had been allowed to continue in that way without somebody intervening, it means for other girls watching from the sidelines, they would have probably felt like, oh, this is what is expected of us, and so they would have probably gone through the same route, you see. So what are we doing again to safeguard our children, and especially girls? Because girls, I feel like they're usually the most vulnerable in communities. We could also do better for men, by the way. It doesn't mean that men are not, or young boys are not facing challenges. And then what policies or programs does the government have? Has the government built shelters, for example, to rescue some of these girls from such marriages or such situations? Like when I hear about Njeri Migwi and Yusukimye, I see like somebody who gives women hope, and even young girls, especially in a time when they are going through the roughest phases of their life. But for the government, are they building spaces, or are they coming up with policies to protect young girls? And for people in power, can they interpret the constitution in a better way to protect such kids from stuff like that? Because as I was reading that article, somebody mentioned that the DPP could have actually, instead of just saying, oh, we don't want to prosecute this person in the context of defilement, they could have prosecuted them in the context of child abuse and early marriage. Okay? Yeah. So, and that means that girl gets their justice. So how are we also interpreting the constitution so that we are able to safeguard girls and protect them? And what can community leaders and institutions do to ensure no girl is forced into a marriage? Like, for example, I believe every place has a chief. There's Nyumba Kumi. Are we complacent? Are we just there watching it happen and doing nothing about it because it's not our kids or something like that? Or are we the ones who are there fighting for the rights of these young girls? Because if a community, I believe chiefs are very influential. If a chief stands up for kids in their community, they'll be heard and something will be done. If you stand up for your neighbor's child, if your neighbor stands up for your child, if we do it from a communal level, then we protect these kids. As a listener, what can you do on your part? Could you provide mentorship and advocate for young girls and young boys wherever you are? Because I have seen people organize like mentorship sessions. They go to schools, they talk to kids. I feel like we all have a role to play. You could go to a school and have a mentorship session and talk to kids about stuff like early marriage, sexual consent, how to safeguard themselves, how to say no and stand up for themselves. It's in the small things that actually literally add up. But what are we doing about it? So ask yourself, what can you do to safeguard that little girl around you or that little boy around you? Can you talk to them? Can you advocate for them? Can you ask the right questions when you see like your leaders are not doing the right thing? Like kwanza, I feel like I should talk about the leadership of Nakuru. I don't know. I feel like they have failed. They have failed us. They are women, and I don't feel like they are standing up for the girls in Nakuru in the way they should, because some of these things have also been reported in Nakuru, like the Maimayo thing, whatever. But what are they doing about it? Every girl deserves an opportunity to learn, to grow, to lead, to explore, and to figure out their life without being interrupted. But we are the adults and we know better and we should do better. What are you doing about it? So the question remains, what are we doing to safeguard our children and more so our girls? Especially in a case like this for Kilifi, where even the 22-year-old had been released from custody and had to be rearrested. Are we really thinking about these kids like long term, or we are looking for shortcuts, immediate solutions that don't affect long-term outcomes? And what can we do better? So, as I was saying, every time a girl is forced into marriage, a community will lose a teacher, it will lose a dreamer, it loses a nurse, it loses a psychologist, it loses a businesswoman, it loses a community leader or somebody who is, who would have done very great things for their community, for their family, if they were given the opportunity and empowered enough. We need to definitely do better. Until next time, I'm Miss Kimaru. Keep it at Safari Yangu Podcast. And please subscribe to my YouTube channel to support this type of content. And I'll be bringing you more stories out here. We will be dissecting such type of stories, talking about people's experiences, my own experiences, my guest experiences, and stuff like that. And I see you. Thank you for supporting us. And follow us on our social media platforms at Safari Yangu Podcast. Until next time, bye.